Up next, we have Alex Funk from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Alex serves as the Agricultural Water Resource Specialist, where he works with the agricultural community in Colorado to create long-term viability goals. Thank you so much, Alex, for making some time to be with us today, and I'll let you take over. Oh, hold on.
Hey, you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Great. And see my screen as well? Great. Well, first, I have to say that definitely wish I was in Gunnison today. I think about a year ago, we had a board meeting in Gunnison and was mountain biking on Hartman Rocks, which feels like an ages ago, but definitely glad we can make this work. And so thanks for inviting me. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of climate change and the nexus of agriculture and state water planning. And talk a little bit about Colorado Water Plan and kind of highlight some projects that are ongoing that are sort of highlighting some innovative approaches to some of the challenges that we've been talking about so far this afternoon. So just to start, if you're not familiar with our agency or with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, we are a subdivision of the Colorado Department of Natural Resources and are the state's lead water policy and planning agency. And so in that regard, we work on a lot of different water resource issues, and including climate. A lot of these issues already, but there have been some pretty groundbreaking studies that have looked at some of the potential impacts of climate change to the ag sector in Colorado and the West. Sort of going all the way back to 2015, there was a vulnerability study that was released by the Colorado Energy Department office in collaboration with Colorado State University and Colorado University Boulder. And some of the key findings in that are that we are going to face some challenging aspects to water management in the future. Everything from declining snowpack, which I feel like we're really experiencing this year in terms of like a rapid decline in snow levels, retiming of spring runoff, decreased soil moisture and corresponding drought, pressure on groundwater supplies, particularly on the eastern plains and places like the Rio Grande Basin that are dependent on groundwater. We're seeing increased risk of drought and wildfire, and then direct impacts to agriculture in terms of potential crop yield reductions, increased pressure from weeds and pests, but also longer growing seasons and new crop varieties. More recently, in 2018, there was the fourth National Climate Assessment release. This was a federal report issued by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that really coalesced a lot of science around climate impacts. It's a really great resource. I definitely recommend checking it out, particularly because it has a chapter dedicated to agriculture and rural communities. And some of the key findings from that was that climate change does have the potential to really adversely impact ag productivity at multiple scales across the country. We will potentially see some direct effects, including those rainfall changes and more frequent climate extremes such as drought. But it also kind of talks about risk and how risk will largely, particularly for the ag sector, be really geared towards kind of the rate and severity of some of these changes and the rate that they're taking place, and the ability of producers to adapt to changes. And I think what we've seen and heard is that at the ag community in the Southwest has withstood some pretty serious droughts in the past, 2002, 2018, more recently. And the way that we manage some ag operations in the state, producers, both farmers and ranchers, know the land and have been able to adapt to some of these changes. But I think what the science is sort of showing and sort of longer term trends is that with increased instances of drought and more severe drought, some of those adaptive capabilities might be stressed to some extent. So what can we do about that? In more recent news, a term that has been kind of making its way through the water community this year is the term mega drought. And so there was a science article that came out last month that had some pretty big implications for water management in the West. And some of the key findings here were that climate change has been responsible for fueling more severe and longer term drought in the Southwest. Another kind of key finding was that the period from 2000 to 2018 was the driest 19-year span since medieval era, so since the 1500s, and the second driest since 800 CE. And this relatively tracks with the periods where some of those medieval droughts were basically what forced, in part, abandonment of some of the places like Mesa Verde and Pueblo cultures. And so these are some pretty significant droughts. And so the fact that the most recent period was on par with that is, definitely a cause of concern. And the findings, show that this might just be the beginning of kind of a new drier trend. In terms of water use, we're kind of seeing, similar concerns in terms of increasing potential supply gaps in the state. So just last year, CWCB released what we call the technical update to the Colorado Water Plan. This is the first step of our, update to the state water plan that's going to be taking place over the next 2 years. So one of the groundbreaking things about the technical update was that this was the first statewide water planning document in Colorado to model the potential effects of hotter and drier climate scenarios on water supply and demand. And so there were 5 different scenarios that were identified, ranging from business as usual to hot growth, which is sort of a scenario that includes really significant increases in temperature and decreases in precipitation. And so, one of the key findings for the ag sector that came out of the technical update was that, we all kind of know that ag experiences gaps currently. We do have water short systems across the state. Producers could always use more water. But I think what the technical update found was that those gaps are projected to increase fairly significantly under some of these different scenarios. And that's going to have real repercussions both for, ability to, kind of sustain ag productivity. It could put more pressure on junior water right owners, and have other sort of economic repercussions as well. So enough doom and gloom, and kind of like, what are we doing about some of these challenges at the state level? So our agency for the past, several years has been really focused on coordinating and working with other state agencies in the water community to implement the Colorado Water Plan. And so the Colorado Water Plan, if you're not familiar with it, was released in 2015. Really in response to the 2013 drought, which was another, sort of bad, pretty historic drought in Colorado history, and was a call for kind of a better understanding of water supply issues in the state, and to develop really a framework for how the state was going to respond to these challenges in the future. And it, there are lots of recommendations are included in here, but it does call for the state to kind of track and prepare for climate change and potential impacts on water supplies in the state. And that's done largely through our agency by directing state financial support through our loan and grant programs to really support innovative approaches to climate change and other sort of challenges facing Colorado's water community. So on the ground, lots of exciting things are happening, and I think we've touched on a few of these today. So I just want to highlight a few sort of innovative projects that are out there in Colorado. We've already sort of talked about the role. So I mean, ag is a really unique industry in that it can play a pretty significant role in terms of mitigating climate change impacts. And we've talked a little bit about, the role that soil health can do that through things like carbon sequestration. But there's really a broad spectrum of what we're calling, natural working lands climate solutions. And so it includes things like soil health, cover cropping, conservation tillage, avoided land conversion, so protecting land from being developed, forest management. All these tools are ways that we can utilize working landscapes to sequester carbon and address climate impacts. And one kind of unique example of that CWCB provided some financial support to through a water plan grant was San Miguel County's development of a potential payment for ecosystem services program. So San Miguel County is in the process of exploring sort of creating a county level program where they would provide financial and technical assistance to farmers and ranchers in San Miguel County to voluntarily adopt soil health practices like composting and cover crops, and then working to actually track changes, monitor changes such as soil water holding capacity, soil productivity, and carbon sequestration. And we think this is a really innovative program, and that I think the ultimate goal here is to sort of highlight that there are some ecosystem services that can be accrued as a result of adopting some of these practices that could potentially create new financial revenue streams for farmers and ranchers in Colorado. Another sort of innovative approach to resiliency is sort of water sharing and water leasing. And so we know that climate change is going to put stress on existing water resources, both in terms of declined flows, and that's going to make it more challenging to kind of meet different competing water needs across the state. So we know in the Western Slope in particular, ag is obviously really critical to the West Slope economy, but so is recreation. I mean, a lot of people come to the West Slope to fish, hike, hunt, things like that. And water is really critical to that. And that's going to be impacted by climate as well. And another sort of challenge that's, you may have heard of are in our interstate water issues and compact issues that could be put to test under sort of a hotter and drier climate. And so a couple things that we're doing in this sense in this regard is we're working to support pilot projects across the state where agricultural water right holders or shareholders conserve water to make that available for other uses, including in-stream flows, recreational flows, and ultimately potentially interstate, compact compliance as well. And so there are two just quick projects I'll highlight here. One was the McKinley Ditch Project, which is located in Montrose County on the Little Cimarron River. This was a project that involved the Colorado Water Trust with CWCB that developed a perpetual split season lease where essentially there would be some early season irrigation of a working ranch. And then in the summer and late season, that water would be leased to support in-stream flow. So this is sort of an example of where we can sustain ag and provide water for other uses. Another more recent project is the Kremling alternative transfer method pilot. And this was a recently approved through one of our grant programs that support these types of projects. And it's going to be working with ranchers in the Grand County area, actually downstream of Windy Gap. And they're going to be looking at different water conservation strategies like deficit irrigation and rotational fallowing, and begin to assess some of the impacts on higher elevation pasture. What we've sort of seen in this regard is that when you do some temporary fallowing, it can take some time to recover. It has some potential agronomic, impacts. And so this study will really kind of take a look at that in more in depth and hopefully offer some mitigation strategies and a model for other places that are looking at that sort of approach, including the Upper Gunnison. Another, we touched on this too, and we talked a little bit about efficiency, and I think that is definitely another priority that's addressed in the water plan is sort of looking to make improvements to assist in making improvements to aging ag irrigation infrastructure. We've talked a little bit today about on-farm sort of sprinkler drip application, but system-wide or ditch-wide improvements such as piping canals, lining canals, can also have like a tremendous sort of benefit in terms of drought resiliency, in that, by making those improvements, you're kind of, avoiding some non-beneficial losses. You can keep some more water in storage. You're maximizing the use of water that you currently do have for crop growth. All tools that can help with drought resilience, but at the same time, particularly on the western slope, these investments have really highlighted some multiple benefits. And that's a really big focus of the water plan, are these multiple benefit projects. And so, one example that's, very close to home here is the lower Gunnison Basin, where there's been a huge investment both at the federal, state, and local level in improving irrigation infrastructure to address water quality issues, mainly salinity loading and selenium loading. And salinity is an interstate issue that affects downstream users all the way to California. Selenium is a toxic metal that affects recovery programs for endangered species. And so by making some of these efficiency improvements, we're also addressing some of those issues as well. And that's really what the water plan is really looking at. How can we sort of identify those co-benefits that can not only benefit ag, but have these broader public benefits as well. And then finally, I just want to quickly mention a new tool and resource that just came out, I believe, last week. CWCB, in partnership with some other state and federal agencies, including the FEMA, released what we're calling the Future Avoided Cost Explorer Hazard Tool. And I've included the link here, and I'm happy to share it with the conference coordinators as well. But basically, it's a web tool that helps communities sort of like project what some anticipated economic damages are in terms of climate risks, such as drought, wildfire, and flooding. And you can actually go by sector and county to like look at some of those expected damages, as well as sort of see how different tools, resiliency tools, can mitigate some of those options. So really cool resource. I wish I had more time to kind of like, I'm just starting to kind of like dig through it myself, but definitely check it out, play around with it. And I think it's a really cool, interesting resource. And so with that, I'm happy to take some questions, or they kind of wait till the end of the panel where we can kind of like share some thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. We did have one question from Rio de la Vista. She said, yep. Alex, I know it's tough times, but could you please update us on the fiscal situations and any thoughts about future funding for CWCB programs, loans, and grants through the roundtables, Colorado Water Plan, etc.?
Great question. And yeah, I mean, it definitely unprecedented times for us. The short story is we're still sort of waiting to see how it's all going to shake out. The General Assembly is returning, I believe, next week to kind of so the JBC, so the Joint Budget Committee has been working on sort of developing their recommendations for potential cuts, which, may include some dips into some of our programs, but I think we're still sort of in the wait and see mode to see sort of how deep those cuts are going to potentially go, and what the extent of those may be. That said, we are anticipating to kind of still offer our sort of core grant programs in the next couple of years, or maybe less funding, but we haven't had anything official come in yet in terms of like, we won't be offering the water plan grants in August, for example. So I think for now it's like, stay tuned. It's might be bad, but hopefully not, the worst. We are, yeah. And then, obviously things like Prop DD, which I think a few of you might be familiar with, which was the sports gambling ballot initiative. Obviously, that's probably not going to, generate anything, significant in these next few years. But I think all this just basically underscores that we need to be a little bit more creative in our funding approaches. We need to kind of think about more partnerships, more strategically, maybe look at some of the new federal tools that were created in the new Farm Bill. There are definitely options to get some of these projects done. I think we just got to be a little more scrappier than usual.
Muted. Thank you so much. I think